Wonder Woman, a character that many creators have struggled with, and also a character who is no stranger to getting relaunches that are attempting to change her direction. As a result, she's had some pretty incongruous periods and some rough patches. So whenever there's a restart that also claims it's going to go in a new direction, it elicits many reactions, from curiosity, excitement, dread, meh. And these feelings can of course be heightened if one is a big fan of the character. In 2023, as part of the dawn of DC, Wonder Woman received a new #1, following her 800th issue. Helmed by the creative duo of Tom King as writer and Daniel Sampere on art, it was set up as a big deal. Now for those who are more involved in the comic fandom discussion spaces, Tom King can elicit many reactions. He's one of those authors who some have a very strong opinion on, and so that can color how they come into reviewing the work or the expectations surrounding it. Some authors or artists have this more so than some of their counterparts. For Tom King, he can be a bit of a polarizing figure for some fans. It's important to lay this context because you're going to see some strong reactions, both positive and negative, to this work, and so part of that is coming from this landscape, which some may be entirely unaware of. Now when it comes to King, while some are ambivalent or take his work on a case-by-case basis, he also has some very fervent fans who feel that all he touches turns to gold, or is full of deeper layers of meaning, while for others he is reviled, a character destroyer, or an author known for putting his own ideas at the forefront regardless of whether they fit the character or universe. Basically whatever genre or type of story is being told will come first, and then the characters and making sure they fit into that comes second. So when it was announced he would be handling Wonder Woman, there were a myriad of reactions. In the months leading up to the comic's release, he gave many interviews. This about the direction that he was taking the character. So unlike some works where there were a few interviews leading up, there was lots of discussion as to how this Wonder Woman was going to be different and where they were going to take her. And so for those who were paying attention to that, that could lead to some of the fervor and buildup in the response. And again, some are not going to be aware of any of this, they're just going to go in and have their reaction, and some are going to be reading it way later when all of this is past. But it's important for the context, time of recording, when Wonder Woman #1 is fresh in the minds of many fans. A lot of these quotes were some of what began to lay the groundwork for certain concerns for some fans or excitement in others. So let's lay them down so that you too can get into the headspace, or at least know the context. This issue could potentially elicit some strong feelings, and also is going to try very hard to introduce a new villain. And when it comes to DC villains, you know, some can end up being quite iconic. And you may even want to spend some time with them outside of comics. And you can with the help of today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by HeroClix. HeroClix is an award-winning miniatures game with a simple beginner-friendly rule set. It makes it easy and fun to learn, and there are numerous figures from multiple fandoms that you can play with and different base sets. And that also means that you can add on to them, which is what we're talking about today. Today we're looking at DC HeroClix Notorious, which, can you tell that I've opened it? 81 villains that you can add to your collection. They come in sets of 5 and they're the usual pre-painted miniature figurines. Some of them are really big. They need the extra bubble wraps, like Raish. Look at him, he's all tall. If I bring him too big, he gets out of focus, but I have some B-roll of him too. With the DC HeroClix Notorious collection, you can have some iconic villains, obscure ones, and that of course appeals to me. And they'll also come in these mashup packs, so sometimes they'll come in groups that make sense, like I got Superman with Bizarro, but then sometimes they'll come in combinations that would be a very fascinating battle. The DC HeroClix Notorious collection is a fun way to vary your gameplay and hopefully get some of your favorite versions of your favorite villains. I also have these really cute Riddler dice, which I'm just gonna use for other things because I can. Monopoly, Riddler dice. If you're interested in getting some of these packs or trying to collect them all, I will have links down below. And you can use my code CASUALLY10 for 10% off. Maybe one day Steel and Sovereign from this Wonder Woman issue will be there. But first we need to detail how we got to this iteration of Wonder Woman. It's quote time. There were lots of different types of comments, but here are some that led some to feel concerned or feel that King was really going to grasp the character. We had comments about Wonder Woman being too perfect and that he had to make her relatable. None of us are perfect, and it's hard to have empathy with someone like that. And so to combat that, he wanted to focus on what he felt is the inherent Wonder Woman paradox, stating, every time she punches someone, she's failed at her job. She wants us to live in peace and love, but here she is as a warrior, as a fighter, so her own success is her failure. He also went on to say several times and in many different ways in different interviews that he feels that Wonder Woman's core character is that of a rebel, and that this is one of the fundaments that makes her different from Batman and Superman. Batman enforces the status quo, he fights crime. Superman, he he's a guy from Kansas who believes in the American way in some sense. The thing that occurred the most to me was that she's rebellious. Wonder Woman is the rebel. She's the one who makes her mother upset. Now, as we discussed in the Trinity video, in of which Wonder Woman's daughter Trinity debuted in a story that serves as a bit of a prequel for the first issue of his main Wonder Woman run and was part of the Wonder Woman 800th anniversary special, he talked about making sure Wonder Woman was worthy of the Trinity. Basically talking about the perception that for some she isn't part of it. Stating, sometimes Wonder Woman can fall out of the Trinity. I think people go to Batman and Superman first. She deserves to stand up there because I remember my daughter dressing up as Wonder Woman for 3 years in a row. There's going to be a nod to that in this comic, a little girl who loves to dress up as Wonder Woman. It seems to be a reference to that. Back to the quote. And what it meant for her to ask for a lasso, my wife ended up buying a rope and painting it. Like, I want her to be worthy of sort of that, of what my daughter sees in her. And that's my goal. King was also very forthright about talking about how Wonder Woman was a character who he was very nervous to write and felt that maybe he wasn't even the right person to do so. And that she's a character who needs to be done correctly. Now, this quote is a bit of a long one, but it's vital for context because it's one that for some people they really embraced and for others set them off. So let's do it. I'll put time codes for if you just want to go with a review. It's that kind of video. Quote time. Yeah, I'll be honest. I did not want to do Wonder Woman in the past. I've tried doing Wonder Woman in the past. I feel like I failed a few times. I mean, I've done okay, but it's always been intimidating. I think it's intimidating for a lot of people because she's just a hard character to get right. There's a lot of people in the 80-year history of Wonder Woman who have swung and missed on this character. I was at George Perez's funeral last year and they did one of those things where George had recorded something to be played at his funeral. It was an interview with him about his career. Everyone was crying, of course, and he said that's the thing he was most proud of in his life. He's like, they offered me Wonder Woman, I was scared but I took it on and I made it something special. And I was like, oh shit, man, George is challenging me. Laughs. He's calling me out. I felt like he was pointing a finger at me and calling me a coward. I was like, yeah, maybe we can do something good like George did with his run. Something essential to the character. After that, he once more goes on in this interview to define Wonder Woman as a rebel, but the stage is set. The goal is to do something essential with Wonder Woman. An exceptional character-defining run, which is definitely what happened with Perez, who also had to relaunch the character and took her in an entirely new direction, and for some, the defining direction. Now, the rebel part is really gonna matter because King is gonna set Wonder Woman up against a system. But it's gonna be the one of his choosing, which may or may not be the best suited to the character. That being the American government, ostensibly, but actually a figure working behind it as well as government officials. It's gonna be a very Amerocentric work and a very aggressive work in getting its messaging across. There is no subtlety to be found here. And also, the first issue has very little Wonder Woman at all. And mileage is going to vary on whether that works or not for you. It's building itself up very much like an espionage thriller. And so if that is one's genre, this is really going to land. If not, it's gonna be pretty repellent. And throughout all of this, once Wonder Woman does appear, that struggle as to who Wonder Woman is and putting her out there is going to come through in the text. Not in terms of Wonder Woman struggling to find out who she is, but in terms of how she's coming across to the audience. One last quote that's gonna exemplify some of the struggles Wonder Woman is gonna have in this issue in terms of getting across what is attempting to be conveyed. Superman fights for truth, justice, and the American way. Batman fights to enforce the law. Wonder Woman fights for something beyond that. Something beyond justice, beyond the laws of America. She fights for something pure and something more peaceful. Now, at this point, it must be reiterated that creators, many of them, aren't sure what to do with Wonder Woman, as King himself stated. Her last run before King took over was all over the place. It even began with her coming back to life, Valhalla, a whole bunch of stuff. It wasn't very focused or clear. By contrast, this issue is very clear in what it's attempting to do. So in that way, it's a solid start. The question then this becomes, will it work for you or not? Issue 1 of Wonder Woman, if you are familiar with King's writing tropes, is full of them. Overarching, at times detached feeling narration boxes, sometimes veering into pretense, other times not. Superhero deconstruction, overt critiques of some kind. In this issue of current American sociopolitical issues, moments attempting to capture Alan Moore, or in this case also Frank Miller style storytelling. There's going to be a lot of televisions, the structured paneling, which is also a staple. Now, if you like King for any of these things, it increases your likelihood of enjoying this issue. If not, it increases your likelihood of disliking it. This is one of those issues where the reaction to it is almost as interesting as the issue itself, which is interesting. So what is issue 1 about? It's the setup for the most part, and it is dense. There's a lot to read here. This isn't one of those comics where you can breeze through it in 5 minutes flat. It's something that will take you some time, and it does feel rewarding in that sense that you actually are sinking your teeth into something. And it does have reread value because there may be some details that we'll have to go back and clarify. A lot of the time in this issue is spent trying to build up the villains and conflict. It takes a while to figure out who's telling the story, but it seems to be being told by the Sovereign, and it was begun being told to Trinity in the Wonder Woman special issue. Although you don't have to have read that to read this, it will help alleviate some of that detached feeling from the narration boxes if one does. However, despite all the details, not much happens, and a lot of what happens isn't shown on panel, you're just told it. There is a rogue Amazon going around killing men. We get an opening where she is groped in a bar called Canyers, which is a nod to one of the key players in Wonder Woman's history. I also wonder if it's a dig, since he systemically went about dismantling much of her mythos by removing her supporting characters and villains, and purposely removing a lot of the more feminist messaging in her comics. It could appear that way because the men do die in this location, so that might be a kind of 3D, 4D chess jab at that specific creator. Or it could just be meant to be a nod, because there was also a nod to her original creators in Trinity's name. If it's a dig, it's a subtle, clever, and snide one that harkens back the paradoxical moments in Wonder Woman's history, like how one of the most prominent creators to work on her also put things in place that would lead creators to struggle with how to work with her for decades. Now, this rogue Amazon's rampage triggers backlash, and Dark Age style talking heads discussing the public's mood and how they feel about it, and how somebody needs to do something. It also is reminiscent of those talks in the Snyderverse movies about, do they need a Superman?
I'm not saying he shouldn't act. I'm saying he shouldn't act unilaterally.
What are we talking about here then? Must there be a Superman?
There is.
But the discussions here are less satirical than they were in, say, something like The Dark Knight Returns. Instead, it's a much more pointed exposition news situation. They're going to tell you how certain people feel about the situation and also how you should feel about it. It does actually start off fairly strongly and seeming like the work is going to have a little bit of nuance. There's an attempt at juxtaposition in certain scenes. However, that is very quickly moved away from, because the work shifts from metaphorical to attempting to be allegorical, using the Amazons as an attempted one-to-one comparison for immigration in the United States. And this could be one of those make or break moments for some people. As for some, this will stress the verisimilitude of the DC universe itself, that kind of real-world issue encroaching and raising a lot of questions that aren't answered in universe by the rules within. Instead, the focus shifts to forcing one to look at it from the real-world perspective, and also from a very specific position, and also from a very Amerocentric worldview. But it's one that could potentially fall apart if one actually overlays the Amazons onto it directly, and there are lots of questions that could be raised if one wants to go into it and look at it that it doesn't fully address. They're brought up, but they're not presented in a way that you're meant to consider them from both sides. However, for some this is going to work, particularly if they already agree with the messaging being espoused in the issue, or who don't mind works that don't play both sides equally. For those who feel it works, this will become a pointed and emotionally rousing decrying of unfair systems. For those who feel it doesn't, or whether they agree with the points made or not, feel it either doesn't fit here or don't want that kind of Wonder Woman story, a lot of the emotional set pieces could fall flat. Now, the plot itself is happening at some nebulous point in time. This way it doesn't really have to tie into anything else going on in continuity. And as mentioned, lots of what happens is told through use of narration boxes, and time just moves very quickly through it. Like Congress passes an anti-Amazon bill that forces the Amazons who live in America to leave the soil. Superman talks about it, we don't get to see that or anything, but it's just said that it didn't do anything. Because again, the messaging of the story was trying to convey is going to override any potential in-universe solutions or questions that could arise from this scenario. This because the allegory has become paramount. We'll see this in the commentary made on the American institution ICE, ICE, through AXE, AXE, an anti-Amazon squad that sends entire units to get rogue Amazons who refuse to leave, and then set out in battle garb and charge the entire squadron, and then get gunned down in front of their daughter. Knock knock, who's there? Not subtlety. She's not here. She doesn't even go here. And again, for some, this is gonna be a key moment that just really hits them right in the gut, and for others, it's gonna be ham-fisted and over the top. See, this is the kind of work, it can be really polarizing. Now, the head of this squad is Steel, Sergeant Steel. Sarge Steel is not a new character, but he is new to this Dawn of DC era, so may have been modified, but he hasn't been used a lot in general, and so for some this will be their first introduction, but he has a history with Checkmate and the Amazons. Now Steel is a CIA agent and hitman who gets results, who despite having a name that could get him confused for other DC characters, is a strong part of the issue. He's given a very strong character introduction, he's talked up, he feels important and menacing. In fact, King is trying to position his villains as very strong for Wonder Woman, something akin akin to how Batman has the Joker or how Superman has Lex Luthor, which does highlight an issue that Wonder Woman has, and that she doesn't have as much of a recognizable rogues gallery. That is for most people, which is a result of Kanayer's influence. Now, Steele's introduction connotes the type of man that he is: cold, ruthless, but also a bit petty, as he doesn't like to be shown up or placed out of control. And he has credible reasons for disliking Wonder Woman, as he was made to feel all of those things during Amazon's attack. They actually reference Amazon's attack, an event that they chose to ignore when they did the last Wonder Woman event and just pretended it was the most recent. That was the event when the Amazons attacked American soil. They did. Amazon's attacked. It was what it said in the title. They did it. And because of these events, he has suspicions not just of the Themysciran in general, but of Diana specifically, because he feels that she didn't address that situation properly. So his feelings and suspicions of Wonder Woman aren't unfounded, but this work isn't going to address them on those terms, because again, it's going to fall into focusing on the real world allegorical points it's attempting to make. But he does have a strong foundation and a reason to dislike her, which is a solid start. Now, the one thing about Steele is that they establish him as a contemporary of Amanda Waller, because he's called in when all of this Amazon stuff starts to go down. He starts to set up the task force, all of those things. But then that raises the question, why not just have Waller in this position? It also then further raises the question as to whether Wonder Woman needs to have more female antagonists if they're going to go for a kind of Batman Joker or Superman Lex. That's a genuine question. What do you think? Should her core villain also be a woman? Or do you feel, based on what she represents, that it should be a man? Now, Wonder Woman enters the scene near to the end of the issue. She's talking to Steve earlier on when she learns Steele is being assigned, but her grand entrance is near issue 1's climax. I did chuckle when Steve says she can't throw a lasso around the entire world. I guess this isn't going to enter Grant Morrison Wonder Woman Earth 1 territory. She's just kind of been hanging back, trying to figure out what to do. And even in the discussion, she's been briefly mentioned, but there's a distance. She doesn't feel like a full overarching component in this universe. Even when the little girl is talking about how she dresses up as her, it feels like there's a distancing from Diana and Wonder Woman in this issue, as we'll see in the scene when she finally takes down Axe and Steel. And at this point, it's all gone down. They're expelling people, they're murdering people in front of their children. A lot has happened, the narration box has told us. So it's here that we're gonna see the grasp and presentation of Wonder Woman. And this is also gonna be a moment where some are going to either really embrace or not. We enjoy how she fights. It is rather distinct from her distinguished colleagues, isn't it? Superman and his strength, the Flash, his speed, Green Lantern, his ring, Aquaman, his fish, the Martian, his disguises, Canary, her voice, on and on and on. There was a Batman panel. We didn't have time. They all claim to be so very unique, but it seems to me, at some basic level, these superheroes are all achingly similar. They're soldiers. Predictable, precise, systematic, clinging to their weapons, mechanically executing their plans. We did not fear anyone, neither men nor gods. The government, Batman, Superman, the Justice League. None of them could ever hope to touch us. But her, you see, the rest of them are soldiers, but she is an artist. Kyle Rayner has entered the chat. Let us talk. There's something about this monologue that just indicates a disconnect from Wonder Woman or the past portrayals of her. And it's not just that it's in the third person talking about her and pedestaling her despite the talk of her being too perfect. Perhaps the intent was a disconnect, but it doesn't seem to be. That pedestaling of her is very akin to the pedestaling of certain types of womanhood that forces Wonder Woman to be all things to all people, which doesn't allow her the space to have the same adventures as any of the other characters mentioned. Characters who also don't really fit in together when lumped under the title of soldier, just as Wonder Woman doesn't really fit under the label of artist. There's a fetishy aspect to it, which, if intentional and addressed, could be a very interesting callback to her BDSM roots. A clever one, playing with themes of submission interwoven into her Golden Age stories by her original creators. We'll have to see how it plays out. It could be very clever or a misidentification of a core element of the character. It could go either way. If anything, one of the traits that is glossed over is one that sets her apart from all characters mentioned. She's a warrior, born and bred. That's different from all of them. Now, this fight between Wonder Woman and Steel, instead of really getting to the core of their differing beliefs and issues with each other specifically, as could have been done and then been used to reinforce the story, is lost in cliches about following orders and also diatribes about men using misogynistic language. There's a lot of bad language in this, but it's hidden behind grolixes. Men cussing all the time. Grolixes everywhere. You I do not like that word. You use it for women, and it is not good. You are assigned to hurt the Amazons. I'm obliged to protect them. I know that you and I will meet many times in the future. When that happens, yes, when you come to me again, and what you said, try to put me in my made bed. Please do not use that word. It upsets me. Our issue ends with some ramping up of tensions between the groups, such as an arrest warrant for Wonder Woman, and also she got some info from Steel. She interrogated him off panel. And also of the reveal of the black lasso that we saw Trinity had in the other story, which was revealed to be the lasso of lies. And with that weapon, it was he who conquered this magnificent land from sea to shining sea. He who discovered the key to holding that land, our birthright, our rule secret. He saw the revolutions, the guillotines, and saw how enlightened men despised knowing they were impotent. He had the insight that a polity that presumed it had the power of self-government would never rebel. And so he told them all that the laws that dictated their lives today and forever after were of the people, by the people, and for the people. And because their sovereign held the lasso of lies, America believed. So this lasso and this scene, which does elicit a very visceral reaction, probably more so if you are American, this is supposed to be where all the lies that Americans believe come from, this black lasso. It must be said that for a work that has some strong critiques of America, it is falling into one of the classic American stereotypes of being aggressively Amerocentric and focused. This image in this moment is one that I can see being very polarizing. For some, I can see them cheering this moment and others letting this book on fire. It's definitely meant to elicit a reaction, and it most likely will. And again, this is part of where it not being as balanced or nuanced a work is something that could harm a moment like this or hinder it from having the full impact that it would have otherwise. For me, it's a moment that made Wonder Woman feel very secondary to the narrative. It's a story where the themes and points being made are just using Wonder Woman as necessary to make them. She was barely in this issue, and despite all the talk of Amazons and her being mentioned, it didn't feel like a build-up. There are some cool things introduced. The lasso of lies is one. It's a fun idea and an obvious counterpoint to the lasso of truth. Imagine something like this in the hands of Dr. Psycho or Cheetah, but in this story with this tone, it almost feels out of place, jarringly silly, and also could come across for some as patronizing or condescending. Heck, imagine this is something like Diana's hands. That could be very fun and interesting, wielding both the lasso of truth and lies. But again, for some, because of how it's coming across in the story, it may put them off the entire idea of it. Diane has been seen in her civilian persona, so hopefully more of that and her job comes into play, since given the genre is the perfect place for her government or military ties. There could even be entire civilian issues where she has to say go undercover or liaise with Steel. Lots of potential given the type of story being set up. We'll see what actually ends up occurring. Sergeant Steel is a decent character with a strong motivation, who at points ends up coming across like a caricature despite not being one because of being placed in a forced allegorical situation. It makes him feel more like a cardboard cutout lead in an espionage novel than the fully fleshed out character he has the potential to be. But it must also be noted, this book isn't bad. Not on a structural level. There are many strengths there. There's also some strong storyboarding and parallel panel layout. It's all very deliberate. There are lots of aspects to enjoy about it, and lots of things that I could see people enjoying depending upon the type of story or storytelling that they're into. It's structurally sound and laser focused. It's just the focus is on the point it's trying to make with Wonder Woman rather than on Wonder Woman the character having an adventure that happens to elucidate that point. There's a difference, and for some that difference is key. Also, it's really going to vary how some feel about this take on Diana, who again we're not very close to yet, so it's hard to get a full grasp on her, even when she has a whole conversation with Steve. But as always, this is the first issue, so we'll have to see what comes. It's clearly been plotted out. But many of the subjective elements, such as its handling of theme or the story itself, may render it for some very unenjoyable, overriding the technical strengths. Now, because of how this is just floating about at some point in the DC universe, this came across like it would have been a strong entry into one of King's Elseworld works, one of the Black Label ones. It also must be noted that at the same time this is going on with the title Wonder Woman Outlaw, Batman is also having a storyline called Outlaw, or he will be if you checked out the solicits. That could potentially be confusing for some people. That's what editorial is for, to time these things, to make sure that doesn't happen. But a lot of what's going on here feels like it would fit very well in that type of Black Label story. How it's going to slot into the overall DC universe, which at this point is trying to become more interconnected and more cohesive, one will have to wait and see. Also, if it's Black Label, you could put the swear words in. No need for all those Grolixes. And also you could show those murdered men like this issue clearly wanted to. This issue is also very overt with its male versus female messaging, down to Wonder Woman literally being called girl to her face. Miles will vary. Personally, I think it would have been stronger if they'd gone the condescending pet name route. A sweetheart, sweetie, or honey, babe, or old school. Toots or dame. Remember, never call chicks broads. Despite all the ramping up of various factions, nothing ever really felt urgent in this issue, potentially because of how much was handled in those narration boxes, which for some can really put them at a distance from the story. Distance appears to be the word of the video. Distance. Now this was an interesting start, because it is a stronger start than she's had for a while, and the art is beautiful, but subjectively is where it could really fall down in some ways. So at the end of the day, if it sounds interesting to you, check it out, and like or dislike what you want. March to the beat of your own drum. For those who are embroiled in fandom, with certain creators there can be pressure to like or dislike or have a strong reaction, and you can do what you want. Have the reaction you want to have, strong, mild, meh. If it sounds good, check it out. If it doesn't sound up your alley, don't. Check out one of the other things. But now the question for you, where do you feel that this relaunching of Wonder Woman lands in terms of starting Wonder Woman over again at #1, or just with a new direction? I want to hear from you. How do you like it so far? Does all of this make you want to read more? Does this sound right up your alley? Maybe this doesn't feel very blunt but more nuanced, or you feel it needs to be that in your face, and if so, I want to hear that too. Are you excited to see where this era goes? I'm, as with every new relaunch, curious. Let's chat down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things: like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid, and thanks so much for taking some time of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon.